these 4 African Americans who are expelled from school for a semester for getting in a scuffle with other students who were only expelled for like a couple of days. Then you have the drowning of the 11-year-old child in the Holmes Road dump site. There had been reports that a child had been shot by the police, right? So you have like all of these things going on.
Bubbles and bubbles and bubbles and over.
Yeah, bubbles and bubbles and bubbles of things going on. And it's interesting to look at, right? Because you have to look at like the history and the involvement of the police. And you also have to look at like the demographic structure of Houston. So Houston did not have necessarily a concentrated African American population in one place, right? You had African Americans who were living on the north side. You had African Americans in Acres Home, in 4th Ward, you know, in then 3rd Ward. And so it wasn't as if the police could be like, oh, well, we're just going to go in that neighborhood, right? They're in Sunnyside, like there are pockets everywhere. But what you could do is you could target those students. They're sort of a concentrated group, and you could hone in on them because they were pretty much at most of these protests that were taking place. Right. And the students were doing what students across the nation were doing. And I think that it was pretty impressive what students were doing, especially when you look at what was happening at the Holmes Road dump site, because that dump site was situated in an African American community, which was something that was being done on a regular basis, where these dump sites are located in Black neighborhoods. And so students, not just students, but students and other activists are fighting against environmental racism. Like that really, nobody really talks about that, right? And so it's sort of like this buildup of all of these things that were happening. And also during this time period, Wheeler, which is now the Tiger Walk, was open. It was open to traffic. And that was a real concern for students, because essentially the university is split. And so in order to get from the dorms to your classes, you have to cross this busy thoroughfare. And so students were upset about that, like all of these things, right? And did students probably do things that they shouldn't do, like throw things at cars? Yeah, of course, right? But did it warrant what happened to the students? No.
Oh.
No. You know, and so when we talk about what happened in '67 being a riot, unless you're going to say that it was a police riot, then it wasn't a riot, right?
Right,
because
definitely.
If you look at all of the witness testimonies, the accounts from the students, like they're really caught unaware at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and their dorms are bombarded with thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds of, you know, bullets.
Oh yeah.
And
luckily not as many people got hurt as they did.
Yeah.
Thousands of bullets.
The one officer who was killed, Cuba, you know, at first they were saying that it was that fire came from TSU, and not true. That was a ricochet bullet that was friendly fire, you know, that killed that young officer. And it was also friendly fire, ricochet bullets that injured the other 2 officers that were injured that night. So TSU has, I would say, always been, for better or worse, and 67 at the moment was worse, right? Because of the way that the media portrayed it, the way that the mayor was talking about it, and the mayor was Louis Welch at the time, and the way that Police Chief Short, they all talked about it as if they had done the best possible thing that they could have to prevent any further uprising. And I'm like, what?
In these words, uprising, riot, and then the photo ops they did with the students that they
And that,
blasted everywhere.
yes, and that in and of itself was so dehumanizing. You had students who were, some of them were asleep. They were being pulled out of their dorms with their night clothes on. If you read the newspaper articles, and some people have written about it, like Joseph Middleton, he wrote an article about it, where students were being beat because, you know, they were asking the students to lay down on the grass at 3 o'clock in the morning. And of course it's cold, and you're telling students to be still, and they're wet and cold and they can't be still. And so you're beating them because they're shivering. Or, you know, the accounts of students who had physical deformities who could not lay down and be still. And you have police who are brutalizing them. Like, this was not a riot. This was an excessive use of police force. You have 488 students who are arrested.
Right. On the nose. Yep. That's what it was. I mean, the more I study it, the more I learn the history. It ties into, I'm being called a lot to talk about stuff during this month because it's also Pride Month. And the Stonewall riots are called a riot. Wasn't a riot. It was police aggression, police profiling at its best, at its worst.
And you know, the problem is that so many people, like, after called into question what would happen, because TSU has its own police force.
Right.
So why were you calling in the city? Why was the city of Houston police there? Right? Why was Harris County there? Why couldn't this have been handled in-house?
Why did they block off the streets? And
exactly. And that's what I was going to say. Like, even before this is happening at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, earlier, the police had blocked off Wheeler. Like, it looks very planned out that you are going to now target this concentrated group, where you cannot really do that and try to go out in a neighborhood, right, and strong arm people. But you could do that with these students.
Oh yeah.
And then, you know, the group that they labeled the TSU 5 are exonerated because there was no evidence that 2 of them were not even there. One of them was at home on the north side, and what are you doing? What are you talking about?
Right.
Right. So,
right.
Yeah.
No, not at all. No, they wanted their pound of flesh because unfortunately there was a death. But during the 60s, it was such a, like you're describing, the students were so active, and they were following what everybody was doing across the country.
Exactly.
And what young people do all the time. I mean, we were back in our 20s way back when, so we were just as active, I'm sure.
Yeah, I remember being at U of H when everything happened with Rodney King. We were like out there.
Yep. 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 When you're young, you want to make those changes. You want to be involved. You start becoming aware of your place in a larger society and your role.
Exactly. And I would say that's exactly what's happening right now, right? With the unfortunate death of George Floyd, and just seeing this mobilization of people. I saw a video the other day with little kids who were carrying signs saying Black Lives Matter. Like, this is something that really brings back to mind when Emmett Till was murdered, and then you have also you had the Montgomery bus boycott. Like, all of this happening simultaneously.
Right.
It's really got people, you know, in just like riled up, right? And I think that what is really interesting to watch, because we saw this with MLK, but it was different, right? The use of, and I think students tend to think that social media is new. No, it's not. I would say that, you know, MLK used social media, and that was the TV, right?
Yeah.
And so you had in living color students being hosed down with, you know, fire hoses and dogs attacking. And so now what's a little different is that we're actually catching on camera police brutality. And you know, one thing about a camera, unlike a person, a camera can't lie, because the camera is not talking. The
Right.
camera is catching what's happening. The camera is not biased. The camera is not going to, you know, add things that weren't there.
It won't get doctored. Well, hopefully
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Well, hopefully not. And so just as what was happening, right, with MLK, people are seeing this. They're seeing it in real time. The brutality that is being inflicted upon not just Black people, but brown people.
Oh yeah.
Right? They're seeing this and asking the question, like, why is this continuing to happen?
Oh yeah. And especially since it's always happened, but now everything's being caught, and so it makes it almost exponentially worse, because none of these deaths are being hidden away like they have been, because it's been happening forever.
Exactly.
Do you how do you feel like the current movement, how do you feel like students are, if you've been in touch with students or just seeing on social media and TV, how do you see these students taking part in the movement and connecting it back to important movements in the past, like in the 60s, like when everyone was out, when everyone was trying to make sweeping change? I mean, especially since a lot of it took a long time. The boycotts for the bus systems were like, what, 380 days long?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, how do you look at history and take that those little nuggets of wisdom into the present?
I've had students who have been calling me and texting me and asking me the same question, like, what's going on? Like, what do I do? I had a student recently who said, can you send me a list of books that I can read? Like, yep, I got